we have so many issues we could tackle, right? You touched so much of what goes on in our city, our state, and our country. I've got a few issues here. A couple of them were pre-submitted questions, so I'm going to go with the City Club flow and ask a few questions. Does that work for you?
I mean, I thought you were going to do that. So, yeah.
So we're going to start with economic development. And you've had you placed some big bets, right, in recent years. And, data centers, film industry, electric vehicles, they've seemingly paid off, right? And companies, big companies, are investing in Illinois. So, for instance, can you tell us how you got Rivian to Illinois? How do you pull them from Georgia?
Well, let me start by saying that it wasn't about placing big bets. We have an awful lot going for us in this state already. So it wasn't about like, oh my God, but let's put it all on red or something like that. It really...
There's a casino down the block now. I don't know if you've heard.
I have. I heard I had an invitation to go there for free, but they're never free. Yeah. I mean, we have a lot about Illinois that is very attractive before you ever get to tax incentives or anything else that will promote the state. But, I want you all to know that when I came into office, remember, I had been in business before I ran for governor. And so I came into office with a goal of, well, let's attract companies to the state. Let's keep the companies that we have here. Let's work with people to figure out what it is they need and want, and then address those challenges. Can you all hear me if I hold the microphone here? And so I showed up in office, with every intention of doing that. By the way, I have not probably gone a year without some crisis hitting this state. Even the first year, which was 2019, we had a fiscal crisis that was still going on in the state, trying to balance the budget. So start with that, and we could go through every year. But I showed up here, and the first thing was the fiscal crisis, and I kept saying to people, what happened to the money? Where's the money? I'm digging holes in the backyard at the governor's mansion, trying to figure out who buried the money. It turns out there's nothing there. Just a lot of holes now. But I say that because what we didn't have was anybody promoting the state. What we didn't have was, I say anybody. I think all of us were trying to promote the state, but I'm talking about at the highest levels of government in Illinois. What we didn't have was a concerted effort to do economic development. You go to states like Wisconsin or Michigan or Tennessee or Texas or South Carolina, the list goes on, where they have an economic development corporation that lives on, Democratic, Republican administration, it doesn't matter. There's an entity that lives on, whose job it is to attract businesses to the state and meet their needs, right? And we don't have that in Illinois, and really never have. We have a Department of Commerce, but their job is really more of a grant-making organization, or at least when I came in, that's what they were doing. And otherwise, it was more of a haphazard endeavor. So we maybe had 3 companies that would just show up in Illinois asking the governor's office or the Department of Commerce, big companies, saying like, hey, we might like to think about Illinois. And then it was an all-hands-on-deck quick, let's respond to the 3 companies, but there was no concerted, organized effort. And so that was very disappointing to me. Now, I came in, I had a lot to do in my first year, and then COVID hit. So it was very hard to just organize that and get that going in the midst of a couple of crises. But coming into 2022 and finishing that year after reelection, I really focused on how do we reorganize ourselves so we are focused on attracting businesses. Invited a couple of really great site selectors, just individuals who are willing to offer their expertise to advise us. And the first thing I asked them was, are we on your list? Like when you talk to companies, your clients, you have a list of states that you think about taking people and showing them. Are we on the list? No. By the way, these are folks who are based in Chicago. And it's not because they didn't want to show. It's because the state wasn't organized to give them the information that they needed to show Illinois off and the best things about Illinois, because we have a lot going for us. But if we're not showing off the fact that one of the best states in the country for workforce, for skilled labor, if we're not showing that off, who knows it? We do, maybe. We get, we're on a list somewhere of great states. So I'm sorry, that's a long-winded answer, but I wanted you to understand that it wasn't anything that really existed. Now, I told you there were 3 states or so that would show up every year. Now we've got a pipeline report that I go through once every couple of weeks with our team, and it's got 30 plus companies on it. These are big companies with many hundreds or thousands of jobs that they're going to bring, billions of dollars of investment that they want to bring to the state. Rivian, as you know, was already in Illinois, which is terrific. And they came here, but it was a startup, as you recall, in 2015 or whenever they bought that Mitsubishi plant. And it was a startup with, no sales by the time, a little bit before I came into office, a year before I came into office. And when I came into office, there were maybe 2,500 employees there. There are now 8,000 employees at Rivian. They went to look for a second state to build another plant in because they wanted to diversify. They wanted to, think about where, and also they wanted to, frankly, get the best deal they could from whatever state they would talk to. And they ended up deciding that their second plant would be in Georgia, because Georgia literally was handing them $5 billion. Okay, now we don't have $5 billion to hand to a company.
That was my next question. Do we
don't
have any billions?
We have a lot of other things going for us that beat out money, but money's not unimportant, And so we didn't even have a closing fund a couple of years ago where we could put some cash on the table. Other states like Texas, for example, and Georgia were writing a check up front for $1 billion to a company to come to their state. We didn't have anything like that. So Rivian was thinking about going to Georgia. They had signed a deal to go to Georgia, but they came to our office, this is a few months ago, and said, we're going to build our second truck, new vehicle, smaller than the one, less expensive, kind of a middle priced vehicle. And they were going to do that in Georgia, but they said it would be faster for us to get it to market if we thought about Illinois, but we need to make sure that we can, do it in Illinois. We've got a piece of land, but, we're getting offered all these incentives in Georgia. And I said, well, I'm not going to be able to match what Georgia is doing, but I can for sure match, we will build a workforce development program. We call it an Advanced Manufacturing Institute. And we will help you attract people there, build housing in the area. By the way, you can't buy a house in Bloomington Normal these days, right? And if they want to add hundreds and hundreds more jobs, we need to help them with housing. So that's something we're working on. But the point is, we now have an operation where we can, one by one, knock down all the things that a company is looking to do. And if they come to Illinois, right? And that's what we did for Rivian. We proved to them that we could do all the things that they needed. And FYI, the incentives that we offered them are only incentives that they get if they deliver the jobs and deliver the investment in Illinois. Otherwise, they don't get the incentives.
You referring to the over the border in Wisconsin a few years ago?
Yes, we're not. Yeah, I don't want to even say the name of that company. Yeah, we're not doing that.
So you've been, that's been a big effort. I know you went to LA recently, right, and filming. We've got some film industry folks in the room. How did that trip go, and what's the reception? What's the reception there from that community? Yeah, and I don't want you to forget, because I know you mentioned a couple industries. You didn't mention quantum, which is another one. But let's talk about the film and TV industry. So obviously there were films being made in Illinois before I became governor. So it's not like I created some opportunity, right? And Chris Dudley has probably, been doing this for quite a while and understands this way better than most. But the film and TV industry, we have a tax credit in Illinois that needed some tweaking. It needed some extension. There was more work to do on our tax credit. But if you have the right tax credit, then the question is, do you have the workforce? Because California, by the way, doesn't offer any incentives to companies because, that's where most of the production companies are based already. So they don't need to. But other states provide incentives.
So you're competing with about 5 states around the country that have really good incentive. And once again, I don't want to be the state that's just providing the most money to a company to come to Illinois, right? We have to have the other things that they need. And then the tax credits are important, but they're less important. So we don't have to spend so many taxpayer dollars to get these companies. What do we have here? And again, I want to credit the industry for coming up with these ideas, but we now have a workforce development, again, dollars that are paid in because companies come here to film, and they're paid into a fund that essentially funds workforce development. And we now are producing 250 to 300 new people in the film industry. These are people that are handle cameras. They're I don't know all the titles of key grips. I don't know what that is, but
I watch the credits.
Yeah, as well as creative folks here, right? And so, but we have a developing industry here. And just so you know, since we changed the tax credit and created these programs, the industry here, putting aside the year with the strike, but barring that, we've almost doubled the industry from about $400 million to more than $700 million a year of revenue. Wow. So the industry created a trip, put a trip together for me and them, and we all went to Hollywood and met with Netflix and Amazon, and those are the new producers around. Warner Discovery and Disney and so on. And we met with the highest levels of folks at those companies, and we pitched. I mean, I pitched with our film office, I might add. Peter Hawley is terrific and runs our film office for the state of Illinois. And we pitched not just the tax credit, which was kind of the given, like you don't get in the room unless you have a tax credit. But after that, when we told them about all the things that we have going, including 1 million square feet of studio space, which did not exist 5 years ago, right? 1 million, we had like 100 or 200,000 square feet. It isn't enough for the big Hollywood studios. Now we have 1 million square feet. That's enough. And many of them didn't know that. And this is the biggest problem we have, by the way, as we've created all this, interest in Illinois and by all these industries, is we have to tell them about it. We have to make sure they know. And so sometimes that's a trip, with the governor, and a commercial trip with the leaders of an industry here.
A future City Club outing delegation to Hollywood.
I love that idea. I mean, I appreciate you offering to pay for that. And
we need a few more of these events.
But they don't have views like this out in California, just so you know. But anyway, we had a great trip, and honestly, we got an idea from them about something we need to change in the law that'll help us get a certain new kind of television production that's happening around the country. And so that's in the works for the next week, when hopefully the legislature will be done with their work. And they still have a lot of work to do. So I'm here. But seriously, they gave us an idea, and we've already gotten incoming calls about potential new shows. And just to give you an idea, if you all haven't paid attention, there's a new show on Apple Plus called Dark Matter, which was produced here in Chicago. That's just one. The Bear. I mean. They just did. They're doing still seasons 3 and 4 at the same time, and I mean, we are a destination certainly for television series, and we're trying to do our best on film. Although again, Georgia is throwing ridiculous amounts of money, and I had to walk into a bunch of those rooms with the producers and say, "Listen, we're not going to throw bags of cash at you like Georgia for your films, but we have a lot of things that Georgia doesn't have, like the workforce, for example." So. Anyway, I think we did very well on that trip.
So I'll pivot a bit. What we also have, I think, is such a great transportation network. And I mean, everything from transit and public transit to, regional transit. And I see Kirk from RTA is here, and we talk so much about transit at City Club. There's been recent discussion about a complete overhaul of the state transit system. There's O'Hare's, modernization is in flux. High-speed rail has been coming back into the conversation. What are your priorities? Not to mention, we're right in the middle of the country, right? So that's something to offer all of these. What's your priority, transportation-wise, over the next? I just mentioned 4 or 5 possible, projects, major. What's your priority?
Let me start by. Do I have to say anything nice about Kirk?
We are non-party.
Because he might be running for governor.
This is City Club.
No,
This
okay.
is City Club, Governor.
You saw he's not running for governor.
You heard it here, folks.
Witnesses. But seriously, and Kirk and I are friends and have been for a while now. I look. First, if we hadn't passed Rebuild Illinois, we wouldn't have any money really for transit at all. And second, we it's clear we have some reorganizing to do, as well as, we've got to deal with the challenge of what people are calling the transit funding cliff. And that's something that there's a lot of discussion about. Really, there's been very little actual movement in Springfield. I don't want you to fear that. There's a lot of discussion about what that movement should be, and I don't think anybody wants to take a step forward without knowing and understanding what the plan is. But in my view, and I actually said this to Kirk walking in the door, as I have said to others who lead agencies in the Chicago area and surrounding areas, and that is, they need to come forward with their plan. I mean, I know we have other organizations that have put plans together, but I mean, the transit agencies themselves have to come to Springfield with their plans. Show us what cost cuts you're making. Show us what your fare box can look. And then, we need to talk about what the organizational structure should look like going forward, because it's disorganized now, and they don't talk to one another sometimes, and there are lots of improvements that need to be made. So, and I'm hoping that the federal government will step up, but I have come to believe that, until they tell us something different, we're on our own. We have to plan for that. So a lot of work to do. I don't want to, get too far into the weeds, but there's a bill that was introduced. It's not going to go anywhere right now, but for merging all the agencies together, and I don't think that we're quite ready. There's a lot more that has to go into it.
Well, I'll say is, City Club is committed to having these conversations as we, as everyone continues to understand what makes sense and make it more of a conversation than just, speeches and plans that are just being pulled, and talked to. So we're committed to that, and we're going to do that soon. So I think hopefully that'll help clarify a few things. Okay. Very few minutes, very many questions. I don't know if you've heard about this, but Chicago is going to host the Democratic National Convention. I think it's in August. There's a lot going on with that, right? There's a lot happening. There's a lot planning. What a great time to showcase this incredible city and of course our whole state to the world, not just the country. The world's going to be watching. And there's also that balance of there's a lot of anxiety around town. We know that we can show off the best and brightest and the great things that we're doing here in Chicago, but there's a concern about the protests. I'll just say it. It's been out there, especially in the last couple of weeks. How do you see that balance happening, where we want to show off this incredible city and obviously do it the right way?
Well, let me begin by saying that it's a big deal for the city of Chicago anytime to host the Democratic National Convention, and I am so thrilled. And we can't control international affairs and whether there's going to be a conflict somewhere in the world that people have a reaction to. So let's be clear that it isn't like anybody planned exactly that there might be protests.
I thought that was under your authority, but no.
Yeah, right. There's only so much that I can control from Springfield. And I have to remind everybody, we don't have a foreign policy in Illinois. I have some things I'd like to say about Indiana and Missouri, but this city has hosted more conventions, both Republican and Democratic, than any other city in the country. And it's because we're good at it. And I know everybody wants to look back at the one in the 60s, but the truth is that we're not living through a time like that. That is not very different than what we're having now, right? There are going to be protests, and there are protests at every convention. I have been to, I think, every single convention since I was able to vote. And there are protests all the time. And there will no doubt be protests here in particular about the conflict in the Middle East. But I do know, because I've sat in many of the meetings, I see Alderman Brian Hopkins here, who chairs the Public Safety Committee in the City Council and does a terrific job. Thank you for the work you're doing. Yeah. And obviously nothing's entirely under our control, but I will just remind all of you that every level of law enforcement is going to be engaged in this convention. It's not because something unusual has happened. This is what happens at conventions. I have met with and seen, the Secret Service, the FBI, the Illinois State Police, which is under the state, CPD, sheriff, and so on. And by the way, we have some folks coming from surrounding states. So people should feel and understand that there is a very strong focus on security, safety, and so on. And we're going to see protests, but what you are also going to see is the beauty of the city. The fact that we know how to run conventions, the experience of having 50,000 people. By the way, the Rotary Club has a 50,000 person convention, just to remind all of you.
Started here in Chicago, right?
And it is, yeah. And their convention is here this summer. So, and so I just to remind you, like this, we actually are pretty good at this. And anybody who remembers the NATO, summit that occurred here, a few years ago. We know how, and they had a lot of protests, right? But it went off without a hitch. So I feel very good about our prospects for running great convention. I realize the political press wants to skip over the fact that we had an fantastic 1996 convention in Chicago. They want to just forget about that. And I was there at that one too. And everybody who's here is old enough was there. I mean, it was amazing, right? The city looked amazing. It's a boost for the city of Chicago to have the Democratic National Convention. By the way, we have the leader of the host committee here with us, Christy George, right here. And so I feel good about it, and everybody else should too. And yes, You're going to see stories from now until then about, oh my gosh, what's going to happen with the protests. Yes, they're going to be protesters, but it's also going to be an amazing convention.
Good. It's good to hear that from you. I think a lot of people need to hear that more often and become part of this, as so many in this room are already and will be.
Right. One last thing.
Yeah.
Policing, technology, all has. I mean, since 1968. Trust me. All of that is being put to good use. So just to remind you, it's not anything like. There's no National Guard that's going to be, knocking heads here. I mean, they're around. We have National Guard, and they're under our control. But that is not, this is a very, very different moment in the world, and for policing and for management of protests.
Okay, switching again a little bit. It's May. It's Mental Health Awareness Month. And most City Club regulars know we had the Surgeon General, Vivek Murthy, here a few months ago, and we're really committed to kind of taking that stigma away from that's associated with mental health. Yeah, thank you. It's an important issue, right? And so since and I know it's been a major part of your agenda, right, in the state, and we've heard a lot about that, but. Since we had the Surgeon General, I've asked everyone really that I've had this honor to interview. I've asked them how they deal with their own mental health, and I get a lot of different answers. And we all understand you have a lot of forces pulling at you from every which direction, from family to politics to downstate to Chicago to you name it. That can wear on you.
Are you saying I have mental health issues? You're aware of? Yeah. Everybody's got mental health care to do.
It's something that I think we need to talk more about, and some of the answers I've gotten. I go watch movies. I have a drink at the end of the night. But you know, it's something that I think really we like to bring up, and if there's any ideas that you've had or any ways that you've had to deal with that yourself to share, we'd appreciate that. Or if not, you'd talk to us a little bit about your agenda and what you've done to really bring this issue to the forefront in the state.
Okay, I guess yeah, that's right. I'll start with a little policy, and then we'll go a little bit more personal. We have made a lot of strides in the state. You know, one of the first things that I did when I came into office was to try to bust through this stigma that exists out there where people don't want to talk about it like it's not a real thing or like it's an embarrassing. It's not an embarrassing thing. All of us have mental health challenges, all of us, in one fashion or another. Or we ourselves or a relative of ours has had a serious mental health challenge, right? And we all know somebody, all of us. And so the idea that this should be hidden and in the shadows is ridiculous. And we're never going to really address it unless we talk about it like it's the same as physical health care, because it is. So when you talk about health, it should be all encompassing. People sometimes refer to it as brain health if you want to make it about biology, which it is. But mental health care is something we all ought to be talking about, and we all ought to acknowledge that if it, you know, that we know somebody or that we ourselves have had challenges. In my case, and I'll talk, and I should mention that. So I appointed the state's first chief behavioral health officer, and we've organized at the Department of Human Services around this issue to focus on not just but addressing it. How do we organize to provide more mental health care in the state? How do we attract? Because the first thing it requires is people, trained professionals, right? You talk about capacity. It's not just buildings and things like that. It's literally we need healthcare professionals. So how do we attract healthcare professionals? How do we make sure that we're an attractive state for mental health care professionals to come to or to take up this as a career? So all of that we've been addressing, and then we also created a transformational program around children's behavioral health. Dana Weiner from Chapin Hall at University of Chicago is leading that effort. The idea here is, I mean, for any of you who have children, maybe one or another of your children has had mental health challenges. For people who don't have resources, and for people who do, it is near impossible to figure out what you're supposed to do, because just again, stigma has made it difficult, and it's just if you've never had this problem before or had to deal with, what do you do? I can speak from personal experience. So Dana Weiner is basically what we decided is we're creating now like I'll just describe it as a big welcoming front door for parents and young adults and children to walk through, to get help, to be navigated to the thing that they need. Because none of us, again, you don't know that everybody's got a different challenge, and it might require a different kind of professional. So that is what we're working on and creating in the state of Illinois. I believe we will be the best in the country when we're all done at it. We have strides to make, and we're focused and investing in it. My own personal experience is I was, as a young person, my mother had behavioral health issues. She was an alcoholic. I believe, looking back on it, that she was self-medicating a mental health challenge, which is often the case for people. But she was an amazing person. I mean, she's brilliant. She went to Radcliffe. She was a leader in so many ways, and she was an activist. Some of you may have heard me talk about the fact that I was the youngest in my family, and she used to take me around with her when I was relatively little, 8, 9, 10, 11 years old, to rallies, to pro-choice rallies, to LGBTQ rallies, because she was a big believer in personal freedoms and the expression of those, and the fact that the state and the federal government ought to be standing up for people's rights. And it's one of the reasons that I'm an activist, even as governor, on behalf of those issues. But my personal experience was that, I lived through very difficult moments. She was a widow. My father passed away when I was 7. She was 39. She had 3 children, and at the time 7, 11, and 12 years old. And she was an alcoholic. So all those things, right, that she had to deal with. I mean, she's my hero because, when you're going through your own difficult, tragic circumstance and you still have the job of caring for others, and you don't know how to get help, and the stigma is out there. Remember, she was the really my father's partner in building Hyatt, and so she was a well-known person, and difficult to admit you have challenges. And so imagine she went through this for years, and she passed away when I was 17 years old, and of alcoholism. But what I watched was somebody who struggled, and I lived through not knowing what. And she did everything because she went to Alcoholics Anonymous meetings. She checked into rehab. She did everything she could do, and we had resources, so she could figure it out. If you don't have any resources, and there's stigma, and you may not have anybody to help, like, what do you? And so that's why this is personal to me, and why I will do what I need to do to make sure that we are creating, especially for the most vulnerable, an avenue, a door for them to walk through, the opportunity for others here and elsewhere to help people that they know and not be embarrassed about any of it, and not help them not feel embarrassed about it, because that's the world we ought to be living.
I need a moment to collect my thoughts on that. Thank you. Thank you for sharing. Thank you for that effort. Thank you for sharing that with us. I especially appreciate you talking about your mother, and it actually, some of what you talked about leads into a question that I have. It kind of answers it. You did grow up with means, and you here you are, the governor of the state of Illinois, and which, by the way, the Washington Post just called us, the state of Illinois, the most normal state in the U.S. I don't know if anybody saw that. It was just last week. The most normal state. I'm serious. You can look it up. And
I love that that's viewed by everybody as a compliment.
Right. Wait. So with the second,
I don't think I'm helping the image for a normal.
The only reason I don't quite believe it is because the second most normal state, I think, is Florida. So I don't know about this study, but okay.
It was about demographics, everybody. It was about demographics.
So really, and you answered part of this by talking about your mother and what she brought you through. How do you balance? So here you are, the governor of the state of Illinois, the most normal state. We've got it all. We've got the city. We got the skyrise. We've got farms, and you're just as comfortable on a farm in Cairo as you are in a boardroom here. You've got a progressive agenda that I don't think anyone would argue of, a very progressive social agenda. Yet, the financial, you've been conservative with finance. You've seen the state finance grow. Your cuts coming. How are you balancing all of that? And what are you going to do next with it? Are you going to run? Everyone wanted to ask, are you going to run for governor again?
Yeah. Dillard wants to know if I'm running for re-election. Let's see. I'm not sure which part of that to pick out and answer.
The balancing act. How about the balancing act? You got upstate, you got downstate.
Look, yeah, but I do want to, I just want to say, because use the word progressive, and then you talked about being fiscally responsible. That is what we've been doing. That we have balanced the budget every year. I know there are people who want to complain and say that, well, they want to, I love the folks who kind of, I don't know, they don't say it, but it seems like they remember fondly the few years before I was governor, and I don't remember those years fondly. And I knew when I came into office. I mean, there were people in the business community. I was in business before I became governor, and there were people in the business community, very well-to-do, successful people, who would come up to me while I was running and say, "You don't want to be governor because you're going to have to declare bankruptcy, or do something because it's going to all, fall into an abyss." And I'm like, okay, well, that's why we should want to do something about it. And so I knew when I came into office that we had to balance the budget. We had to deal with our pension challenges, that we need to address. There's a list of things that we had to do. First thing you have to do, by the way, if you want to deal with any of it, is balance the budget. Okay, so otherwise you're never going to get to all the other problems. So we need to raise our credit rating. We had the lowest credit rating in the country. We had dropped 8 credit ratings just in the 4 years prior to my becoming governor. And actually, since 2010, I read we'd dropped something like 21 credit ratings. So I mean, had to deal with that problem. And you can go down the list. And so that was when I mentioned fiscal crisis at the beginning of this. That's what we were facing. And you can't do any of the other things. You can't do mental health care. You can't invest in education, higher or K-12 education, early childhood, which is a passion of mine. You can't do any of those things unless you balance the budget. And so that was job number one. And meanwhile, you can do progressive things, along the way, but you have to be able to afford them. And so, there are things that I did even in my first year that were progressive, but not didn't cost the state a lot of money. But we had to invest. We had literally hollowed out state government. Anybody who has dealt with state government, I mean, it was bad. We would open positions everywhere in state government, weren't getting the job done. Again, had to do a lot of work. And then COVID hit a year later. So an additional challenge. But I just wanted to highlight that because being pragmatic while doing progressive things, I think is the right avenue. It's the right thing for
Refreshing
the
to
state.
hear that.
But you got to do both.
Mm-hmm.
And remember, I'm a business person, so I'm also a capitalist. Maybe there are people who don't want to hear me say that, but what I mean is, I'm not saying capitalism is perfect and does all the things that you think society should, need, but rather that I do believe that the system that encourages people to get rewarded for their work, the system that encourages people to go out and start businesses and create jobs, that those are all things that are part of a successful United States and successful state of Illinois. And so all those things are kind of mixed together in the way I think about the future. And then you had, the last half of your question.
What's next?
Yeah, well, more.
Are you going to run for governor again?
Yeah. I have, isn't that like I just got reelected like a year and a quarter ago. Do I really have to answer that?
Well, okay, we'll have you back. How about we have you back?
You can have me back. You'll ask me again. So. I will say, here's what I'll say. I really, and this is not pablum or, a standard answer, just to say, I really do love I do love, but not where I'm gripping it for dear life. I don't want you to think that, but I mean, just that the idea that we have problems to solve, and I am a problem solver. I believe in, you asked me about mental health earlier. My wife joked that, when people ask her, what does he like to do in his free time? And the answer is my staff. I'm looking at a few staff people know, and my wife knows is I like to work. And then, what does he do on vacation? Well, he, works. And so, yeah, maybe I'm boring in that way, but I mean, I like to problem solve. And we have a lot of, we have a list and we've been going through and problem solving as we go. But I mention it because on the mental health scale, what gets me back to center is sometimes I just need to be alone for a little while. And when I'm alone, you probably won't be surprising to any of you, I'm problem solving. How am I doing that? I like to work on puzzles. If I'm not doing something that's work oriented, hard puzzles. And so, that to me, being alone, focusing and solving a problem, even if it's something that's, joyful, although again, the rest of the job is kind of joyful. So I do love the job because I get to wake up every day and tackle a problem. Sometimes those problems are, just come upon you, right? They're not the things that are on your list. It's and COVID, here you go. but sometimes it is on the list, and and most of the time it is, and we're working every day to try to solve those problems. I have the best staff, and I'm really I love
I see Ann here. Your team's incredible. They always very great to work with. Well, thank you. I mean, that we are fortunate as Illinoisans, as Chicagoans, to have you leading us in this city, in this state, and doing it on vacation, doing it every day, in and out. We're so fortunate to have MK as a first lady. She's an incredible woman, and we look forward to having her back here.
I should say out loud to everybody, I love spending time with my family too. I do, but and my wife is amazing. You can imagine how hard it is to be. Well, some of you don't have to imagine how hard it is to be the spouse of somebody who's run for public office and is in public office, right? Because they get a lot of attention, sometimes unwanted attention, often, and my children too, who've put up with an awful lot. They're 19 and 21 and in college now, and they've all had to put up with quite a lot. But just spending time alone away with them is also like brings.
Well, enjoy that next trip. Hopefully, it doesn't take you out of the state for too long. Everybody, I could do this all night. Everybody looks thirsty and hungry, although I think they're probably hungry for more. So hopefully we can talk on the way out a little bit. Governor Pritzker, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
That was awesome.
Thank you.
You're welcome back anytime. Have a great night and a great weekend, everybody. The bar's open until 6 or so. Thank you for being here.
Thanks for watching, and if you haven't already, please consider subscribing to our channel. And while you're at it, please leave us a comment. Thank you for watching.